Good morning and welcome to Deep Dives with New Perspectives. I'm Michael Bartlett.
I'm Merrylin LeBlanc.
And if you like us, please hit like. If you please subscribe, tell your friends about us, ask questions. Hope you're enjoying. We're trying to make this an enjoyable way of learning about astrology and kind of talking about our own experiences from our uniquely Aquarian Scorpio perspective. Of course, there are other planets involved for us,
But yes, Michael and I share this crazy, transformative, future-oriented, with a deep dive into the past.
it's funny. I was thinking about
Can't leave the past behind,
No,
unfortunately, or fortunately. I don't know.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, in a sense, it kind of touches a little bit on our topic, which is, we're going to talk about some planetary changes. As we know, yesterday, the 15th of March, depending on where you are, of course, on the planet, Mercury went from very thoughtful, intellectually oriented Aquarius to the more feeling, airy, fluid space of Pisces.
It's magical.
Very
A magical
magical.
space, a very magical space. And yeah, there's some other changes coming up that we want to address this week. But let's talk about Mercury in Pisces. I guess would be a good starting point. One of the things that struck me right away is that Mercury in Pisces in astrology terms is in its detriment. This is an old-fashioned astrology term, meaning it's weakened.
Because it's normally because it's the ruler of the opposite sign, right? It's
Yes.
because it's the ruler of Virgo, so it's thought that, oh, well, there's no way it could really possibly work well in the sea of Pisces.
Right. And its other sign, Gemini, is an air sign. So, it's strongest in air and earth. It's very thoughtful, has to do with our communication and our thinking processes. And of course, a lot of that comes from our minds. We don't actually see it. It's sort of like surrounding us with information. And we want to make sure we don't forget it. So we write it down in concrete terms. But when it enters the oceanic world of Pisces,
It's different information, right? It's it's interesting. Like what I really appreciate about astrology, and I think if it's one gift that astrology gives to humanity, is the understanding that we all process information differently. So if we consider, the difference between the way the mind processes in Gemini or Virgo versus how it processes in Pisces, which is about feeling, which is about sensing things from the other side, getting, being basically like a sponge in an environment and like seeking things out and not even really understanding sometimes even why, because it's a very sort of almost like a very subconscious, unconscious state of beingness for us daywalkers.
yes, but one of the things that's so rich about the placement of Mercury in Pisces is that it can feel the impulses of something new
Mm.
coming into existence. In Pisces, we call it seed ideas.
Mm.
You know, um, the seed from which all kinds of life evolves, and Pisces can tap into that energy, and um, I would imagine that people who have Mercury and Pisces are, I don't know if they're science fiction writers per se. I do have a book about writers in astrology, and I did not look at it to see what kind of writers necessarily they are. But one of the things that I do know about them, people who have Sun in Pisces, and not necessarily Mercury, but Mercury's always close to the Sun, so they would either have it in Pisces or perhaps in the next sign of Aries or going backwards in the sign of Aquarius. Um, so it's in that territory. But they often have what we call seed ideas, things that, oh gosh, I've never heard that before, or what a concept. And that's what makes me think of science fiction, unusual science fiction writers who come up with worlds that we haven't conceived of yet. Kind of strange in that respect. Um, Also, this is a little bit different because, I mentioned that this is a detriment, that it's weakened. But in looking at this energy, Michael, it dawned on me that in terms of weakened energy, you and I have our not our Mercuries, because yours is in Capricorn and mine's in Aquarius, in areas where they're quite strong. One is earth and the other is air, and Mercury does well in those elements. And yet we have our suns in Aquarius, which is said to be weakened. It's in debt. It's in detriment there. And we have our moons in Scorpio, which is also said to be weakened, but it's literally said to be in its fall.
Mm.
And that has to do with exaltation. The moon is said to be exalted in the sign of Taurus, which is the opposite sign of Scorpio. So you and I work with this basic energy that in astrology terms is said to be weakened, but we also have other ways of compensating for that. And so it really dawned on me. I mean, just taking the moon in Scorpio in the fall,
Mhm.
it's I had to learn how to express my emotions as a child already in school. And even there, through I had a high school history teacher who later, after I, was teaching, we had the occasion to live in the same convent together. And I was having um, a strong emotional reaction to something. And she said to me, I thought I would never see the day when I could read your mind. Because as a kid in school, whether I was a younger kid or a teenager, I was hard as nails, and boy, you'd have to guess a long time to know how I really felt. I mean, I contained my feelings very, very well. I mean, they were under lock and key. Now, I don't know if you had that experience with your Scorpio moon. But that's part of how I see the fall. It's like the emotional states were not easily expressed, and part of it was out of fear that I would just completely lose control.
My sense is with the falls, the closest I've seen is like with the esoteric teaching, the understanding is the fall I think it is like, it's basically what you said, it's ego growing. It's not ego growing, but it's for your soul's growth. It's like this requirement of becomingness. Because whenever I see Mercury in Pisces, I don't know about you. I mean, I have my Saturn and my Chiron there. I'm always moved. If I see Mercury in the 12th house or in Pisces, I automatically know I'm dealing with someone who does not see the world in the same way that everyone else does. I automatically know that they are. In fact, the tagline I almost always use, and they always give me a giggle, is, "Do you hear the voices?" Because there's a way in which everything around them informs them, and whether that's a voice, or those are images, whether that's sensations, they're like, anytime I see any Pisces planets, I always think of a sponge walking through life, and because it's water, it's just absorbing everything that's around them. So they're always picking up on things, and what is mine and what is someone else's. And when you say that, I loved how you said, they speak to things that you don't think of, because they're observing things from a whole different way. Think about being underwater and how different the world looks versus how it looks on the air or on the earth, right? I mean, those, like you said, air and earth are about these very set kind of clear, Mercury likes it, it understands its footing. But I actually think Mercury, because of its ability, we've talked about this many times before, it's the psychopomp, it's the ability to go down into the underworld, be on the earth, be up in the heavens. It can travel anywhere it wants. And so my sense is it kind of likes to challenge itself by going into the different elements and challenge its ability to process, right? So people with Mercury and Pisces need a little more time to feel. Like, you're not going to ask them what they're thinking about, you're going to ask them what they're feeling. Because the way the world informs them is not logical, right?
Right, right. And water, you're reminding me that water needs a container. And so, if you're working with a person who has Mercury and Pisces, as an astrologer, and this would be true for teachers as well, you need to provide containers for it. It's sort of like the teacher saying, we're going to write haiku poetry. And that means that you have to have this many lines and these many syllables in each line, okay? And that's containment for the person, because the person with the Pisces Mercury could just go into, oh, poetry. I mean, and just be very fluid. And and people reading the fluidity might go, what are they? These are beautiful phrases that they've come up with, because they feel good, but I'm not quite sure what that person is saying, because it could be all over the place. I mean, you take that water out of that glass, you throw it up in the air, and boy, your room is full of water.
Right, because and when you think about it, think about what it's like for those individuals learning in the structured, logical manner in which we have our schooling system. Their minds don't work that way. So those individuals, it's funny because I think of Mercury in Pisces as being almost like a Mercury retrograde. The ways that things are being processed is very different than other people's. And people may assume that they're stupid, that they don't understand things, or that they're overly sensitive, those sorts of things. But the truth is, like, how to own and support that sensitivity, because that is the gift that they bring to the planet. That is what's important. And to really be careful about not putting themselves around others who don't appreciate that or denigrate them for that, because there's a different sort of knowledge, there's a different sort of processing going on that is so deep and so connected to so many other things that, I mean, it's like I think of like Stephen Hawking's mind. I don't know if he has Mercury and Pisces, but I think of someone like that, where it's just like this, they may be trapped in the physical plane, but inside they have such a gorgeous, rich, imaginative world in which they just go off, and they can be gone for days. They don't even need any drugs to go there.
Oh yeah. And so besides Mercury having moved yesterday into Pisces, we have another movement of the planet Venus this coming Sunday, moving from Pisces, a sign in which she is said actually to be exalted.
Right.
And of course, we're talking about different energy. We're not talking about
The
Mercury.
sea goddess, right? She was born in the sea.
Yes, exactly. Out of the sea she arose. She's going into Aries, where she will be in her fall, in the sign opposite Libra, one of her signs, Libra and Taurus. Again, she rules an air and an earth sign, just as Mercury does. The two of them are actually work in concert. Yes, in terms of any kind of creative, artistic work, they're like peas in a pod.
You need them together. And also, what's interesting is just before that, of course, is basically, we have what we in the astrology world call the new year, right? The sun's moving from Pisces into Aries on the 20th. And then Venus the next day on Sunday is going to be joining up with them. So it's like, these big, quite big changes. And so there's this, you know, I wonder like how much stuff is going to get done now. You know, our Mercury is going to be in Pisces, which is going to make it kind of, you know, we're going to be probably processing a lot of the emotions and the feelings that have been going on for the past couple of months and maybe even the past year, as people are understanding, you know, feeling the anniversary of the COVID, you know, issues, you know, the pandemic going on. And then that Sun and Venus are like, let's get things done. It's time to roll up our sleeves, time to get out of the bed and make plans and get things done.
Yeah, Venus is our, well, it's among other things, our feminine nature, whereas Mercury is androgynous. But Venus, you know, brings up feminine energy, but actually femininity and masculinity are expressions, they're not genders. And in Aries, she brings up more of a female's expression of the masculine. It's more this directed energy, which it is also in the opposite sign of Libra. It's a masculine sign. It's like it seeks to find that perfect union, that perfect balance, that perfect harmony. And it does so actively. It's action out there in the world. And so, oh, there she is. There she is with
Oh, yeah.
her.
Well,
her
here's with both of them. Let's see. Slideshow. So that's the, let's see. So the Sun goes from, come on, baby. No, it's got to catch up. I did a couple little slides. So the Sun goes from Pisces on the 20th in the more mystical space.
Yes, yes.
Years.
And shifts into that warrior suit.
Goes into the dressing room on
I
the
go to
screen.
the dressing room. I see, yeah, the closet. Pull out the shield, the armor, the sword. What's interesting, what immediately flashed in my mind, and I'm not even thinking of Kamala Harris's chart, and I have it, but I don't recall any of the details on it. But she and our President Biden and her husband and the First Lady, they're all hitting the road to, you know, talk about their agenda and make sure that people understand where they're coming from and what plans they have, not just with the stimulus program that's going on, but other plans too. So they're connecting with the American people. And it's sort of like, you know, you think about the feminine element, both our vice president and the first lady and the first husband, they're all as couples, they're, you know, I mean, Venus is about relationships, but as couples in this relationship, they're going out there to spread the news about their plans for the country. And in a way, that's, in some territory, it could be considered, you know, having to put on their warrior suit and be sure that, you know, they're safe and yet heard and seen.
And Venus represents our values, right?
Yeah,
You know, so it's
exactly.
like getting out there and like, you know, kind of, and
Working for them.
Aries
Yeah.
is also a bit of a, I mean, it's germination technically, but I also think of Aries as having a bit of a seeding, you know, at the very beginning of the Aries cycle. You know, we consider also the world point, right? That Aries, that 0 degree. What's the Sabian symbol for 0 degrees Aries?
It's a woman arising out of the ocean with a seal embracing her. It's Aphrodite. It's like you know, in spring, you know, the season of spring represents new life, and it's also the representation of the fact that life comes from the feminine, and this is why in many ideologies around religion and stuff, many people are looking at the feminine as, you know, Christianity put forth, and this is a strange thing about the Piscean age that I think has ended, is that it's a feminine sign and it's about the ocean and this emergence. And actually, in some systems like the moon phase systems that what's his name? The poet who wrote The Vision. Oh, his name is on the tip of my tongue. There's a couple astrologers. There's more. There's about 3 astrologers that I know of who've written about this. And what they found in that system, one is Martin Goldsmith, who's frequently on my show. What they found is from The Vision. It's a poet. You know, I know him. He's he was prolific, and quite the mystic.
Rumi?
Pardon? No,
Rumi?
not Rumi. No, we're talking about
Khalil
somebody
Gibran?
eight, eight, 18th century, 19th century,
Rilke?
19th. No, not Wilkie. No, English, British. Um,
Oh, not William Morris.
no, but that's all right. We can move on.
I mean,
Basically,
Blake.
in his book, The Vision,
Blake?
he sees the zodiac beginning in Pisces.
Oh.
Not in Aries. And part of that has to do with the fact that it is in Pisces where the womb is. The ocean is like a womb from which all life, and what we know of the evolution of life on this planet is that it seemed to have all emerged from the ocean at some point and then evolved on the land, et cetera. And so there is this feminine notion. And actually, in some of the science fiction I've read, in one particular book, they talk about these beings who are carbon-based like we are, who go to gather other carbon-based beings on other planets, Earth being one of them, because they've discovered where God is. And where God is in the black hole. So it's this very feminine kind of womb-like energy, which is what we associate with Pisces as well.
And and in that sense too, is all of our ideas all of our ideas have this idea of fullness and matter. And when we get into those places of like antimatter and non-matter, that actually is still some form of energy and some sort of matter along the continuum, right? That I don't know, like for our little human brains to understand. I think it's very intriguing, but that's how it is with all this, and that's what's kind of great about this. So Mercury allows us to kind of hang out in that question, right? That's what I really like about Pisces, is like Pisces doesn't need an answer. Pisces is okay being with whatever it is. Aries wants the answer. Aries is going out there, it's going to get the answer, and doesn't care what, in theory, what the cost is. But those of us who know Aries people know that they're very unlikely to pull out their swords. But it's the threat of the sword, right? It's the threat of the attack that comes across, I think, with Aries. It's not the promise of it, it's the threat of it. That's the sense of what I get with Aries energy.
Yeah.
There's almost like an understanding of the cost, because Libra is always staring them down from the other side.
Right. Well, and that's a whole other discussion, I think, in terms of evolution, because it's sort of like you could understand the Aries energy with the swords when human life was threatened more easily than it is today. You're making me think a little bit of Steven Pinker's work in terms of how in many ways war is becoming obsolete. And yes, let's hope so. And it's maintained primarily by people who want to maintain a certain type of control for economic reasons. Other than that.
It's very interesting, because I was watching some movies recently with my partner, and we watched like The Hobbit, and then we watched The Lord of the Rings, and he's a millennial, and he doesn't get into the whole Lord of the Rings part. It's like there's too much violence. It's all just about war. And it's funny, because now as we're stepping into the kind of this new phase, that Aries age was like the Iron Age, right? It was a time before the Pisces where, that's when all the great battles occurred, as the Greeks against the Persians, and the Persians against the world, and the Greeks against everyone else. And, all the different factions that were going on, but it was really about this conquering idea. And, it's interesting, now we're moving into this more Aquarian age, like the cost of harming others has become too great. How do we support one another? How do we move forward in a way where everyone gets to, have a certain quality of life?
Yeah. Hmm.
That's what Biden and Harris are trying to do. I mean, with the stimulus package, they've raised, they're considering that this is going to help 50% of those in poverty rise above poverty. I mean, the amount of money being given for the children. I mean, again, we're talking about a certain sort of social democracy, of course, something that's going to be supporting these individuals. I think it's great. I don't have any children, but I want people to be supported. I want their kids to be healthy. I want them to be able to be educated. I think it's really important because that just makes our country better. It makes the world a better place to live in, because then we're not coming from, a place of misunderstandings and the inability to differentiate different aspects of fact.
Well, yes, and also just even, if you want to look at it from a self-centered perspective as well, and I always wonder about the millionaire billionaires, et cetera, who don't seem to care about whatever that society supports a basic level of existence. And somehow or other, I often go like, at some point, if you don't care about everybody, there might not be anybody to clean your house or or build the places that I mean, there's just there's a lack of understanding of where things that we have in our lives come from and how they got there and how they're supported by being there. That we're not complete islands unto ourselves, and yet that kind of thinking, I just kind of go, it's tunnel vision. So the fact that I think this is where countries that are socially democratic have a much greater understanding of what it means to live in community, what it means to live in a group. And what's interesting about that last statement I just made, I was looking at the vernal equinox, and there's process oriented ways in which I look at these things. And first of all, I want to say, that all our universally accepted calendars, we start the world in January, which, is Capricorn time. And even in the solar calendar, it begins with the winter solstice in January. And that Aries, even though Aries is the beginning of the natural zodiac, Aries is sort of like the spring equinox is sort of like the end of the first quarter of a year and the beginning of a second quarter. It's kind of it's like a what we call the first quarter phase in astrology, where it's action time. It's time to get out there. And so in looking at that, I look at, what's the relationship with the sun at the vernal equinox to the planet Mars. And they happen to be in a, a last quarter phase. It's in actually it's related to the quintile. They're in a separating waxing quintile, not quite there to the quintile yet, but it's represented by the symbol of a relay race. And this a relay race has to do with group consciousness. I bring this up because of what we were just talking about. There's a competition going on, and you might say, and now there's a competition between, in some ways, the haves and the have-nots. I mean, just on an economic basis. I mean, how do we level the field? And now Biden is talking about, and he said this in the campaign, for presidency. He's talking about raising taxes and, hopefully, and I believe he will keep to his word that it's going to be for people over a certain income, and it's in the hundreds of thousands that I think 140 or
I think it's
or
over 400,000.
yeah, it's up there.
A significant
Uh,
amount of money.
right. But this is this whole thing of, you know, doing healthy competition in a way, and having group energy work for all and not just a few. And the other thing though is because Saturn seems to have a lot to do, Father Time is one of the images for Saturn, with our timing. What's the relationship at this time with the Sun and Saturn? Well, it happens to be in waxing, or no, an applying waxing septile. That's 51 degrees, but it's 50 degrees, so it's not quite there yet. And septiles are thought about in terms of spiritual energy. But the symbol for the 50th degree into the zodiac, which would be in Taurus, is wisp of clouds moving. And this is about an awareness of spiritual work forces going. And so there's this thing about, can we get the masses? Can we get our social contract in such a way that we recognize that we move and grow according to our spiritual awareness? And I use that word in the most general of terms. I'm not talking about religious awareness. That is different and distinct. But the fact to recognize that we're all spirit, all of us. And that in some ways we have, and this is what I'm going to say is very Aquarian, we don't grow in our spirit without the whole field growing as well. If we stay stuck at a certain level, we're keeping everybody stuck. And so what we see at this time is, kind of a polarization of people. There's people that are still like resistant to the kinds of things that social democrats, for example, have brought up. Bernie Sanders, I'm thinking of in this case. And, Biden had, some of it he's bought into. He's actually going more in that direction than many of us thought he would, which for me personally is yay. uh, but the symbolism used in astrology is pointing this out, and I think that this is definitely a year for us to be cognizant of our past and know that it isn't a good place to be stuck in. And I mean, just look at how much has come up. Black Lives Matter, and then just prejudice in general. I mean, when we think about COVID and people thinking it came from China, and so they're
Attacking Chinese people.
they're attacking China. I mean, and for me personally, this is offensive because I have a nephew who's half Chinese. I mean, it's like
offensive, period. I mean, it's just like, the
yeah,
idea that individuals are somehow responsible for a global pandemic.
yeah. No, it's just
It's sad. But I mean, but the thing is that's what we want. I mean, that's part of our polarized culture, right? I mean, and that's what we need to start getting beyond, is understanding that things aren't so black and white, that it's a range. How do we get to understand things so that we aren't so scared that we have to act out in such painful and hurtful ways with one another? It's, I mean, these are the things that really have to stop.
right. So yeah.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop. How can people find you, Merrylin?
Moonwiseastrology.com. It's all one word, moonwiseastrology.com, where you can find contact information such as my phone number, 505-690-1878, or my email, marylinleblanc@gmail.com. Yeah.
Perfect.
How about
I
you,
can
Mike?
reach at michael@coremichael.com, or my website, Michael.com, or my phone number, 505-690-3860. It's going to be an exciting week. Lots of energizing changes. Have a happy, wonderful spring equinox.
Yes. Enjoy.
And blessings, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.